This is Greg Pass with the Americans in Wartime Experience. Today's date is August the 17th, 2022, and I have the pleasure to sit down with Jeff Berg. I am in Woodbridge, Virginia, and I'm speaking with Jeff through the magic of Zoom. Jeff, tell us where you are right now
Yes, I'm just outside of Tampa, Florida.
and give us your full name and tell us where you were born.
Yes, Jeff Berg, born in Woonsocket, South Dakota, raised pretty much there. Father was in the military, grandfather was in the military. Spent some time with my father overseas, kind of raised by my grandfather, who was a prisoner of war in World War II in the Army Air Corps. So it's kind of a family connection. It's kind of the longing I had to initially join. Initially joined with two fellow members in South Dakota Army Guard, went to boot camp, and then commenced my Air Force career.
Outstanding. So tell us a little bit more about your dad. You spent time overseas with him, you said?
Yes, we spent time. My dad was a fighter pilot, F-4s. Went to George Williams Air Force Base, Spangdahlem. And my dad was in Southeast Asia, obviously. And after he served 12 years active and then decided to join the Guard, Air Guard. So we moved back to our hometown in a small little town in South Dakota.
All right, so at some point you make a decision you're going to enlist in the Air Force.
Yes.
Obviously through some influence of your father.
Yes.
Was your grandfather in the Air Corps or Air Force?
Yes, he was enlisted bombardier navigator in a B-26. He was a farmer, spent a lot of time on the farm. He didn't share his experiences too much with me growing up. I did spend a unique amount of time as a teenager on the farm with him. He hired me as a hired man, and my grandmother would share experiences and says, you should ask him, about these. And it was right before he joined the service that, we started communicating about his past. And he kind of opened up. Both my aunts did an interview for him, similar to this.
Good.
Actually recorded his experience, and we have it on a VHS tape. And so, that influence, I think, and always talk about military service. I had two great grandfathers that both served in World War One. One immigrated, and there were stories shared within the household, family reunions and whatnot about that. And I guess that what created the sense of longing to join.
So how old were you when you pushed the button?
Yes, joined the Army at 18, and then commenced my Air Force service at 21 and retired at 42.
Okay, so I didn't catch that. So you joined the Army first?
Yes, I joined the Army, went into the Army National Guard and served in my hometown Guard unit 3 years before commencing active duty.
Okay, so talk briefly about the Army. So what was your MOS and what were you trained to do?
I was a 12 Bravo combat engineer and received my individual training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
Okay, and so how long were you in the Guard?
From 1980 to 1983.
Okay, and then what was the transition from there? What happened after that?
Yeah, the transition is while I was serving in my hometown unit. The longing, there was a base in South Dakota in my home state. So I kind of shared stories with other people from high school coming back, and I met with one of them. They shared their experience, and I thought, oh, by chance I could be stationed there. And went to the recruiter. Had always had a longing to go, serve as time went on full time. And that's, that experience led me to sign up as a security specialist into the Air Force. So I quickly transitioned out, went to Air Force boot camp in the summer of '83, and then went on to individualized security forces training and air-based defense skills at San Antonio, Texas.
What does that entail? What kind of training is that?
Yes, received 6 weeks of general security, police operations. I was an individualized security specialist. So it was more in the sense of not law enforcement, traditional law enforcement, but guarding resources, both stationary and mobile. 6 weeks of that. And then 6 weeks we were assigned to Camp Bullis, Texas, which was a remote area that we spent time learning how to operate in a forward operating base. Two-man shelters. We had huts. We had individual training, field training, as you will, to get used to operating in an austere condition.
So your training's wrapped up. You're serving active duty at this time. What's your first assignment?
My first assignment was Ellsworth Air Force Base, my home state. Assigned to the 44th Missile Security Squadron.
Okay, and that was doing physical security type work?
Yes, I was a response force member in the missile field complex, just a routine security force member, always training. It's Cold War. I entered at the Cold War, so there was always that. Through my 20 years, I recognize it now, but we spent a lot of time training and training and training.
So you're stationed pretty close to your hometown, relatively.
Yes, it was kind of 4 hours away, one side of the state. So there's a lot of still interaction with family and what I was doing in the military. My dad was real proud. He was still around, and grandfather was still around. Grandfather started sharing more experiences, and yes, it's great family connection to be close by starting your military career.
So that doesn't happen a lot. Did that happen just by luck, or did you stumble upon a four-star general that hooked you up?
Well, no, mostly cold northern tier bases. People choose to go to somewhere warm and sunny. And there was a need for a large number, obviously, in these missile bases because of the amount of security forces manning it took requirement to guard the missiles. So I saw an opportunity, applied in my dream sheet, and was assigned. So managed to stay there for 3 years within the squadron, and then transition right over to a weapons armor at Ellsworth. We had a dual capability with B-52s and missiles. So I went to a home base unit where I didn't go out in the field as much, and basically was responsible for day-to-day issuing of weapons and maintaining.
So when you say weapons, you're talking about small arms, pistols, rifles, that type of stuff?
Yeah, M16s. I was training M16 and a base fire team complex with an M16, M203 grenade launcher, M60 machine gun. At that time, we were still carrying the 38, and then we transitioned the 9mm later on during my transition.
Gotcha. So what was your next assignment after that?
Yes, from there, I went to have received a notification that I was going to go on a remote assignment in Korea, and it was a special duty assignment. And I was asked, I called manpower, and they said, I'm going remote. I kind of had an understanding that once you stay somewhere for a while, the next location is going to be overseas, probably, unless you're volunteering to go with your family. And they called, and I said, well, if I say no, they said, well, you're going anyway. It's a special duty assignment. Do you want it? I said, sure. Just happened to be a Stinger weapon system as a gunner. And then I was assigned to Kunsan Air Base, Korea, and manned the perimeter for 1 year. So
what kind of work were you doing on the Stinger?
Yes. So we would man different areas of the base. Primarily, it's used to protect the base against high-speed, low-level attack aircraft from the north, an ongoing state since the 50s. And they saw a need for additional protection. And I joined that right kind of at the tail end of the Cold War, but right before the transition. So there's a lot of incentives that were going into defending air bases.
So you didn't change your MOS per se. There was just another rank
No, it
system
was
within.
yes, correct. It was a special identifier.
Okay.
Received additional training at El Paso, in the Field Artillery Aviation Regiment there. And then it was a joint base that offered this training to all the services.
So how did were you married at the time?
Yes, I was.
Okay. So how did you find your experience in Korea? Did you enjoy it?
Yes, it was an awesome assignment. Um, you know, not only mastered my skill, but then, took advantage of additional things that would come along with that. And one of those was briefing fighter pilots about the system.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it tied in. My dad was a fighter pilot. So it was a great assignment.
And were you able to bring your family?
No, that was a 1 year remote.
Okay.
And Kunsan at that time was just a remote location.
Gotcha. All right. So your 1 year's up, and then where are you heading?
Well, at that time, my wife was enrolled in college to be a civil engineer, and we had a school of mines there at my previous base. She stayed at my previous assignment in base housing. And then I put in to follow up to return there so she could finish her education. And so I returned to Ellsworth Air Force Base upon completion of my 1 year assignment at Kunsan.
Doing the same kind of work you were doing before?
I was assigned to a different squadron. So it was a 1,200 man group. And I started going mobile with airborne surveillance aircraft that would escort the convoy to and from the site. Some of the sites are very remote. And a unique story to that is the site I used to work at is now the National Historic Museum. During at the closure of the Cold War, I should say.
Okay, so then where are you off to? You were there for
Yes,
3 years or so?
3 years. Just in time, my wife completed her master's degree, and at the closure of the Cold War, while I was assigned there, is the unique thing of how I transitioned to receive another assignment was the Cold War at the height. We were doing all the dignitary visits and the closures, and I was volunteered to do some static displays. And then the assignment came up that we were downsizing the missile complex. And so a unique thing happened that, where are we going next? And the assignments came out that we were going to be dispersed amongst the missile bases, take advantage of assignments, special duty assignments that you're interested in. And I received a phone call from McDill at SOCOM and by name request, and an individual called me and said, would you like an assignment to McDill? And I said, what are you going to be doing? And this is security. And I said, okay, we need you to fill out a package. And I talked to my wife, and I said, sound like a good experience. And in 92, I was reassigned to Headquarters Special Operations Command in McDill, Florida.
So what kind of work were you doing there?
I was hired basically as a security specialist. And then because of my background, some deployment training. But one day, the general walked in and I was kind of a palace guard initially, and I had a clearance and requirement, and he saw my face a lot and said, I want you on my airplane and to talk to your boss. And I was still assigned to the headquarters, but then I became the sergeant in charge of his aircraft.
What does that entail? Like talking about in charge of security?
Yes. Whenever we deployed to unique locations, there was somebody there who had to be kind of a liaison to negotiate security at some of the austere locations where security was not a presence or additional security was needed.
So, what were the day-to-day type activities you would do in that position?
Depending on I had multiple roles, but primarily if I guarding the aircraft at an unsecured location, it was routine, benign security presence, dressed in different attire. Sometimes I was, in a flight suit, kind of blending in with the air crew. I'd help unload pallets, supplies, and then when the party would leave, it was routine security, establishing rapport with the host nation. Um, yeah, eyes and ears of the aircraft for the aircraft commander, in sync with the security detail.
Now, is this in advance? Is this before the Raven program, or is this the Raven program?
No, this led to the Raven program.
Okay, so walk us through that.
So, because of my experience in at MacDill with the 4-star, the local unit at MacDill stood up a program in conjunction with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Chairman of the Air Force, had created a program basically that assigned security force members on aircraft going to remote locations did not offer security. We had a couple incidents that happened that created the program. A stowaway. Traditionally speaking, some locations we went to, the manpower was not there and it was deemed unnecessary to take a flyaway security. And we had always had a flyaway security program throughout time. It's just the formalized training was not there. And that's kind of the catalyst in 96. Cobart Towers, there's some unique, significant things that happened, not just with aircraft around the world, that saw the need to create this program. So I was assigned to my unit, local unit there, and created my own database, airfield assessments. I flew from there all over, primarily to South America. A lot of times, we fly to areas that humanitarian embassies, resupply embassies, floods. We're constantly, going to remote locations. We're not at war with everybody. And we take care of people around the world and supplies are needed. And that's kind of the genesis of the program. And some of those locations, might not be as friendly, maybe chaotic. We were trained pretty much to have thick skin, benign security presence, and also be able to, if we had to encounter, to deal with that. And a lot of that is, through verbal training. Even if you don't understand the language, there's some skills that we were trained in at rapport, sharing, to establish the little post-nation security that you might have at the location.
So how many guys would go? How many guys would go on?
Yeah, so
is this like one guy, or sometimes it's more depending on the threat?
Yeah, it would be 2 to 4.
Huh.
And traditionally speaking, the longer the weeks into the mission, encountering numerous areas that we would go to, could be a 4-man or a 4-person or 2-person, depending on the airframe visits.
So tell us about a few of those deployments that you participated in. I see you Mogadishu at one point.
So yes, at the time I was assigned to the Sink aircraft. We were actually deploying to U.S. Southern Command, South America, routine visits, and as that operation unfolded, Gothic Serpent to Black Hawk Down, different names, unfolded, and the Sink directed the aircraft to deploy to Mogadishu, where we went to Mogadishu to offload the commander, receive briefings and whatnot. The situation there had just happened with the last 2 days, so the timing of it, we could not stay there. It was not an ideal place to keep the aircraft. So we had moved to another location while the parties briefed, and it was good timing for us to have moved because they had been mortared that night.
So
So yeah,
when you say move, you talking about the whole aircraft or just
the whole aircraft, yes, yes. Normally we go into a secure location in an environment like that where the U.S. host forces have control of the airfield, and if it's deemed unnecessary to if they're putting the aircraft at risk, then we transition within hours to whatever the time frame and whatever the relating country had security force.
so you guys were on the ground just for a hot minute when that kind of thing happened?
Yes, we unloaded for a period of 2 to 3 hours. Still somewhat chaotic with all the activity in the area. It was daylight. Most of the activity that did happen was at night. So it was a secure time to, it's kind of unusual approach coming into the airfield with everything that was going on in the area, but we'd managed to deliver the sync so he could receive his briefings and then relocate and come back the next day.
So this would have been immediate soon after the main battle.
That's correct. 6 October. Yes. Yes.
What were your do you have any memories about when you landed and what the environment looked like at the time, the airfield?
Yeah. There's my primary objective was the closest security of the aircraft, even though we had security on the ground. There's a screening force just to make sure that with all the activity that I knew who everybody was on the aircraft, and that transition of the detail got from one location to another. This unique base, obviously the airport had been taken over by U.S. forces, very primitive. So we did have a great number of security forces on the ground. Air Force, both that I linked up with and gave me insight as far as what was going on the ground on my end. So we had that communication. It wasn't, nobody's communicating. It was pretty controlled, be able to negotiate with somebody that could speak the language, I guess, if you will.
Mm-hmm. So is this the same airfield where the Rangers and everybody were staging as QRF?
Yes, the compound, the airport compound was, there was this Mogadishu airport. Yes.
Gotcha. So you guys get up and go, and your VIP is still on the ground. Where do you guys go, and then how long is it before you come back?
We went to neighboring Kenya and relocated the aircraft there, more of a, I guess, less chaos country. And not wasn't unique. We have an embassy in Nairobi. So that was a secure place for us to bed down the aircraft.
So you mentioned Kenya. So you were there at some point in support of the terrorist activities?
Yes. So, and fast forward 5 years, I was assigned in the middle of Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, temporary duty there at the time. And at the time that the bomb went off at the U.S. Embassy in both Dar es Salaam and Nairobi, Kenya, I was on a quick reaction force that one of three that linked up with Marines on the ground at the bomb site, the airfield, secured the airfield. We had two areas that basically was the backup embassy at the time to secure the backup embassy and to secure the bomb site itself. So there's really chaos, and that was probably the most chaotic scene that I probably experienced in my entire career.
Can you tell us a little bit more about it? What you observed, what you saw, what you smell?
Yes, the residue, my team, I also had worked, I was a E6 technical sergeant at the time. So obviously being a sergeant, I was in charge of the entire team on the security forces, Air Force side, and basically could speak the lingo to other services. I had a Navy K9 two-man team, an Air Force two-man K9 team, explosives, and then worked hand in hand with the security forces the Marines provided, quick reaction force, uh, worked extremely well together, communicated well. Obviously, they had lost a Marine or two in the embassy. I believe that at the time there was 11 people that were killed in the bombing, Americans, and over 200 in the surrounding streets. The chaos with securing the perimeter. Obviously, the host did as much as they could until we could end the remaining force that was at the embassy until we could link up and get a good perimeter. There's probably a squad of Marines initially, and then my squad. And the Navy had sent a two-person explosives team, and the residue is still in the air. I remember it vividly because the dogs, you know, the dogs were very sensitive still to the residue and were there for protection. Thought it was unique, that we're there guarding a bomb site, but understood the complexity of the mission. Probably the first time I probably had a tear in my eye just for watching an animal that was trained to the scent of a dog, that I felt sorrowful for the animal trying to do its job. And yeah, that was a memory I probably will keep. And I looked at the handler, and he's an expert. He said, well, what's wrong with the dog? And he said, well, he's his scent glands. And he got a tear and I got a tear. And we still had people that were still trying to get out of the embassy at the time. I believe there was one or two in the elevator that were trapped. So my job was, though, to maintain the security of the perimeter of the bomb site, and then traveled from the bomb site to the backup embassy, and then also to secure evidence from the bombing at the airport. And I worked hand in hand with the FBI, securing evidence, maintaining that security presence over basically the bomb site itself and any type of essential equipment that would come in that we needed.
What did the attack sites look like visually? Do you remember what the structures look like?
At the time, there's the residue scarred there's mylar in the windows, and mylar is a membrane placed in the glass that prevents shards of glass coming from the inside. It basically done its job to a certain degree. Had the vehicle that exploded gotten any closer, the impact could have been more severe. There's still a crater, paper stuck in the trees. I could smell it from walking the perimeter. That it was still present. The back, the building, I'll never forget the building in the back, multi-storied structure. I believe it was 20 stories. All the glass was gone, and then a black residue caked the wall that was facing us. And there's 220 local Kenyans that were killed as well. So there's a chaotic scene.
How long did it take you guys to get there as a QRF?
Myself, joined other folks, but I wanted to say the flight, we had to make stops along the way. I was there within 18 to 24 hours.
Oh, wow.
It's unique because I was, in the smack dab in the middle of Saudi Arabia within Central Asia, control the resources that are available. We had a large number of security at that time that I was assigned to Prince Sultan. It's the largest airfield, largest security airfield in the Air Force. So we had additional forces that could respond in the area.
So, I'm really interested in that scene. United States has probably some of the best and highly trained public safety in the entire world, police, fire department, rescue squads, the whole 9 yards. And they would have a hard time handling something of that magnitude. What were your observations about how it was being handled on the local side? I imagine 24 hours out from the bombing, it was still quite a scene.
Yes, being trained to kind of deal with different things going on at the same time and the different perimeters that, if you will, of host nation, inner security, personnel security at that matter, that are vital to the mission. I think I'll just say this, the list of folks that were on the ground going through all that I dealt with, there was a lot of individual communications. We might not have been on the same and we didn't need to be on the same frequency. It was that close to where you go here, you secure this, getting familiar with the site itself. You can about imagine the amount of schematics that goes into streets. And this happened in downtown Nairobi, and so alleyways, structures. Are they secure? Are they not secure? Check this out. It was just a great team environment that coming out of there is like, we did great here.
Mm-hmm. So how long are you on the ground?
2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Until we received additional security forces from European Command. Yes.
And where were you guys staying at?
I slept just pretty much everywhere. We took care of the dogs. The dogs had to be obviously climate controlled. So the handler and the dogs, but everybody, I pulled a cot. If I was at the airfield, it was unique. Sometimes being a sergeant in charge, I had forces here, forces there, and transitioning back and forth, maintaining my own security pattern when to travel, get to those forces and checking on them, welfare, vigilance. So I maintained a presence probably at the 3 sites, and just was trained to sleep on an aircraft, sleep on the ground. So it took a couple hours here, a couple hours there, and I had 24 hours to cover because I had 2 different shifts where we tried to keep 12 up, 12 down, 12 hours up. Vigilance can be taxing in that type of environment. So kind of blended my schedule at the peak patterns that I thought would, guys might be a little bit low. Vigilance is not there. That's when I spring into action. And so I kind of maintained a pattern of 3 sites for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Anything else from that deployment that sticks out in your mind?
I think that's pretty much. Just remember the part of the locals. You can't help but take in their own. I'm screening the exterior. Some of it was pretty obviously when I'd gotten there. the crowds had pretty much dispersed, but the curiosity, was still there, for days. And, we felt comfortable. We felt like we were doing something for a host nation that loved us, that we were there, compassionate. Received nothing but compassion from the host country. Just great working environment, considering conditions. That's about it.
Did you have any opportunity to actually have conversations with any of the locals, the survivors who spoke English?
The local security forces I engaged with, and the obviously it was a terrorist attack from radicals. So there, I think the locals were the local security forces were really incited by, finding who caused the explosion. I sensed it. So their agendas were a little bit more direct in a local country than what I would see, but that's kind of what I remember, and for obvious reasons.
So, any other of these deployments that stand out in your mind?
So that kind of led operating that capacity, and then transitioning to the Phoenix Raven world. This was prior to the me being assigned as a program manager. I was still a ground guy, but had air experience, and so that kind of the time frame of the transition with the unique deployments that I'd had with aircraft garnered me the position that I retired in.
So tell us a little bit about the Phoenix Raven program and your role within that program.
Yes. While I was assigned at MacDill in the unit as the sixth person, I had 6 personnel that we would kind of get farmed out, if you will, on airframes that would come and go south. I flew all over South America, resupplies, and I had done airfield surveys, worked with host nations. Because of that, recommendation was they had needed a program manager, and my commander asked me one day, 16 years in the Air Force at the time, and it said, would you like an assignment to Scott Air Force Base at the headquarters? And I said, well, job sounds like for somebody else. This is more of a ground deployer. And so I had great NCOs, though, that, always said, I was in the position, though, that my wife was had a job, and we both talked. And the senior NCO said, it's a great opportunity to say, do something at the end of your career. This will put you at, the end of your career. Do you want to say you authored something, or caveat, the catalyst of it all? This is it. And so put my package together and was assigned to the headquarters in the summer of 2000. 2 months after that, the USS Cole in the Gulf of Aden had received an explosion. Jumped right in upon assignment, and then was actually assigned to go with one of my colonels to the Pentagon to brief Chief of Naval Operations on the security practices of the Air Force and sharing environment of how we secured our aircraft and the sharing of information, better practices in our program, Insight. And then transitioning back, obviously with the time frame of being a program manager at the headquarters from 2000 to of 9/11. I was basically programming for the future, always updating equipment, man portable, uh, thinking of ways to communicate with host nations better. And at the time, there's a verbal translator and enunciator that we were working on to try to talk to communicate with host nations. And so there was some trial with in Bosnia. I was assigned across the Adriatic Sea in the Buda, Italy. There's some transitions, some trials to locate the bodies during the Bosnia encounter. And this tool was a trial was done, and we thought this was going to be a great thing for us to be able to talk. And some of the things we found out, though, as with technology goes, dialects, background noise, for us to be able to utilize it in an airfield environment, there still had to be some tweaking, maybe even in a setting such as this. It could have become at that time somewhat useful, but it was all about staying man portable and lightweight so that we could transition from airframes to the ground. And sometimes we're transitioning from one airframe to another, depending on the needs of the missions that are going on. And we're operating in forward locations. And that's basically my career. It ended 9/11 kind of for the next 2 years. I was stop lost as we invaded Iraq. So there was some, the last 2 years of my career was, basically not really managing for the future, but maintaining security presence for the present.
So tell us a little bit about the big picture of the Raven program. Like, I mean, how large of an operation is this? What kind of training goes into the guys who are involved with it, and where are its tentacles? Is this a worldwide thing?
Yes, so we have mobility aircraft that deliver supplies on the coast, east and west coast. There's 12 CONUS bases, 12, 13 CONUS bases currently, I believe, that have airframes that either deliver supplies or carry fuel. They both could carry passengers, but they're both delivery for resources, both pallets of food, water. I had 156 active members into the program. It was an initial 2-week course. As a result of 9/11, we did incorporate some areas within the Air Marshal program, dealing with contract carriers. 9/11, everybody could say, is something that began. We'll never see it's the new norm in security practices and sharing of expertise within the Department of Defense and outside agencies. And so I kind of garnered that in New Jersey at the Warfare Center, is where the training is at Fort Dix. McGuire Air Force Base is the host for that training. And we spent a lot of time learning the cultures of areas that we frequent. So, for example, the West Coast will, specific training for the Pacific, Indonesia, areas such as that. And then the East Coast, the East Coast airframes will focus in on Africa and those remote locations where we may have to deliver supplies and medical and water, and everywhere that has an embassy, we resupply that embassy with these airframes. And seeking better training. Obviously, most of the encounters that we have trained on are for verbal judo, which is a negotiation skill. You might not be able to speak the language. There's a lot of training that goes into somebody for defensive if you will. You have to be highly trained for that one time. The focus must be, in that non-lethal means, because remember, the U.S. is not at war with all countries, so every scenario that you can about imagine, an individual coming onto an aircraft that's unsecured that comes close to a U.S. airframe, you can only gauge the time of the day. Is it at night? Is it at day? What's the environment? Are you in a chaotic political atmosphere? Has there been a coup? Has there been a flood? Has there been a bombing? And dealing with those encounters on a force spectrum so that you can analyze from the lowest level, what can I use to de-escalate? That training continues. Most learning the survival skills in these countries, whether it's through cheat sheets of quick phrases, learning the culture and be able to share, to establish rapport. I think the biggest thing we had was the little security force presence that is on the ground at some of these locations is the rapport and the trust that you have with these countries. The world's chaos at times, and we respond accordingly.
Talked briefly about 9/11. Tell us where you were when you learned about the attacks in New York and Arlington.
Yes. At the time, I was assigned at the headquarters as a threat working group member. That was additional duty where we gather intel from bases throughout the world on a database. I have guys on the ground, on the air that upload these security requirements. We had just had a morning briefing routine and walked back across the street, the briefcase, and my boss, deputy, walked upstairs and to my desk and walked by, and we had a CNN TV that we kept on just on CNN, keeping up with the world. And small TV sitting on the top of the cabinet, and just to have as a backdrop, and walked by, set my briefcase down, went to the printer, came back, saw it. So I, holy cow, is that an accident? And no, it wasn't. And then with the second wave, being in my shoes where I was, I kind of, one couldn't imagine, but I have probably a 4-month window of really not remembering everything. Went into a contingency security mode and stood up called up the Guard Reserve, obviously, the 9/11 stand-up functional experts from across the National Guard Reserve. We were able to tap into those resources. Those assets were there. We stood up a cell monitoring locations around the world. So I became a maintainer of security presence versus a futuristic guy for the next 2 years. I just phone rang a lot. Yeah, so around the world.
So you served for a career in the Army and the Air Force. If you had a young kid, 18-year-old guy, and he's like, hey, I heard you spent some time in the military. What advice would you give to him or her on how to have a successful career in the United States military?
Yeah, I think by being a senior NCO, that some of the mentoring that goes into the motivation level with the younger generation, whether it be for family, you run into fewer of those, obviously, as that generation dies, there are fewer people to share the stories of serving their country, and kind of catering the needs to, is it to college? Is it for college? There's some individuals that do join that we motivate them, spend a lot of training to keep them motivated. Yeah, I tell younger people still ask me today is, what is your vision? Do you have a longing? There's nothing, I can't tap into your longing, but is there something that you want to help people? And there's virtually every dynamic in the civilian world is in the military, and you receive that training while you're here, and you're getting paid to go to college pretty much. Take good notes. So I think that in my 20 some years of seeing the transition from, I think, the 80s through the 90s, the that that oldest generation that we had passing on the stories of where America's been attacked. 9/11 kind of regenerated, I think, for a while. There's a multitude of reasons that one serves. Passion. Some people find their passion. Some people are content with their passion and look for the next opportunity to move on to their next assignment. So I think by listening to have an individualized conversation with the younger folks that are coming in is finding what their interest is and focusing that interest into a certain spectrum within the military where they're happy, where they're going to be to want to learn. I think that's pretty much, and that comes from the frontline sergeants, that a new person comes in and you share your experience, and obviously if there's another interest, we can steer you into another area of expertise, and keeping that motivation level up. So I think that was the biggest challenge in my career.
In about a month or 2 months, you're going to receive a copy of this video that we're recording right now. You're also going to receive instructions on how you can submit that video to the Library of Congress under the Veterans History Project. As long as we have a U.S. government that's still standing, theoretically, your video will be there 100 years from now. What would you, if one of your great grandkids stumbled upon the video, what would you want them to know about your service to your country?
I did it for my country. I did it for my family. I did it for them. Preserving the future. I stumbled across my grandfather's POW photo on a database. Nobody had his picture. And I'd like to think that one day, I have 3 sons. I have one that served in Iraq, and I'd like to think that one day his kids got to a certain point in their life where something happens in their generation that there's something to be learned from history. You'd be proud of, pass on to the next generation within your family. It stems from me being raised the way I was raised. I'd like to pass that on.
Well said.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Americans in Wartime Experience, I thank you for sitting down and telling us your story. It truly is interesting, that whole program. I was not aware of it up until about 3 weeks ago. So I've learned a lot in the last 3 weeks speaking with you and your friend. So thank you for that. And more importantly, thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you.